the river that was never supposed to run dry. There's one river on earth that both begins the Bible and ends it. It flows through Genesis and it flows through Revelation, and for thousands of years it has never done what it is doing right now. The Tigris, the Euphrates twin, is holding steady. But the Euphrates itself is vanishing mile by mile, season by season, and what has surfaced from beneath its bed is something that governments, geologists, and archaeologists were not prepared to explain. Because when the water pulled back far enough, it did not reveal dry mud and old riverbed stone. It revealed a door. For decades, scientists have tracked the slow retreat of the Euphrates as reservoirs upstream shrank and rainfall patterns shifted. That part of the story is well documented and unremarkable. What is not unremarkable is what a survey team found when the water dropped low enough to expose bedrock that had not seen open air in centuries. A seam, a straight, unnatural seam cutting across stone that should have been solid. Riverbeds do not produce straight lines. Nature does not carve right angles. But there it was, a fracture too clean to be anything but deliberate, and beneath it, once the sediment was cleared away, an opening large enough for a person to crouch through. The team that first reached the opening did not go in right away. They had reason to hesitate. Ground-penetrating equipment brought in ahead of the dig had already returned readings nobody could make sense of. A cavity beneath the riverbed with walls too regular to be a natural formation, and an internal temperature reading that sat inexplicably higher than the surrounding rock. Whatever was down there had been sealed a very long time ago, and whoever sealed it had done so with intention, not haste. When the entry was finally cleared and the first light swept across the interior, the crew stopped talking. Every surface, floor to ceiling, was covered in carved script, not scattered graffiti. Not a single inscription left by one visitor. Layer upon layer of writing, in different alphabets, different depths of carving, different tool marks, clearly made by different hands across what specialists later estimated to be centuries, if not longer. Old Persian set beside early Aramaic. Cuneiform pressed close to scripts that some of the linguists on site could not immediately place at all. Civilizations that never crossed paths in the historical record had apparently crossed paths here, in this one chamber, leaving behind versions of the same short message translated across dozens of tongues. Do not break the seal. It waits for its hour. That repetition alone would have been strange enough. What made it stranger was what was missing. In the ancient world, nothing important went unsigned. Kings inscribed their names on monuments. Priests dedicated their prayers to specific gods. In writing, always, a message is consistent, repeated by this many separate hands across this many centuries, should have carried at least one name, one dynasty, one god credited with a warning. It carried none. Every single one of these visitors, separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles of cultural distance, agreed to leave the same wordless, nameless warning and nothing else. Whatever compelled the behavior was bigger than any one civilization's pride. High on the chamber wall, running down from a point near the ceiling, was a row of small carved marks, each one distinct from the last, arranged in an unbroken sequence. The team's archaeologists examined the spacing and the wear pattern and reached the same conclusion independently. This was not ornamentation. It behaved like a count. The starting mark, if there ever was one, was gone, deliberately removed, or simply never carved where anyone could see it. Only the final stretch of the sequence remained, as though whoever built it wanted the ending visible and the beginning hidden. Anyone familiar with older religious literature will recognize the shape of what this chamber resembles. The Book of Enoch, referenced directly in the New Testament letter Jude, describes powerful beings bound beneath the earth by divine command. Their prison sites marked so no one would mistake them for anything ordinary. Daniel's prophecy speaks of matters sealed until a specific future point. Revelation describes a scroll that cannot be opened before an appointed hour. Different books, different centuries, different authors, and the same underlying idea keeps surfacing. Some things are not lost by accident. They are put away on purpose, with a release date built into plan. Behind the main chamber, a narrower passage opened into a second room, and this is where the discovery stopped being merely strange and became something closer to disturbing. Seated against the far wall of the inner room was a set of human remains, but not arranged the way burials are arranged. There was no shroud, no grave goods laid out in mourning, no sign that grieving hands had placed this person to rest. The posture was upright, spine straight, arms folded across the chest, face oriented directly toward the wall carvings, as though the individual had simply sat down at that exact spot, facing that exact inscription, and never moved again. Scattered around the remains in a careful, non-random pattern were objects that told their own story. Blades knapped from obsidian, small tablets bearing script none of the on-site linguists could translate on site, tools shaped from bone and finished in gold. Historians researching similar Mesopotamian find sites point to a specific tradition, temple specialists whose job was not public worship but containment, sealing off locations where something dangerous had been encountered, and in rare, well-documented cases, remaining behind afterward to keep watch over the seal itself. Obsidian shows up repeatedly in binding rituals across the ancient Near East. Gold was treated as a spiritual anchor, something that resisted corruption and held things fixed. Bone tools appear in rites meant to prevent a restless presence from returning. Read together. These were not funeral offerings. They were the equipment of someone whose job was to keep a door shut permanently from the inside, if necessary. That raises an uncomfortable question. Contained for what exactly? Old Testament tradition, echoed and expanded in extra-biblical texts like Enoch, describes offspring born of a union between heavenly beings and human women before the flood, beings whose fate after death was unlike ordinary human death. Rather than passing on, their spirits were described as remaining active in the world, restless, disruptive, drawn to corruption. Genesis itself notes, almost as an aside, that the same category of being reappeared after the flood, not merely before it. Meaning whatever the flood was meant to resolve, it did not fully resolve. Numbers records Israelite scouts describing giants in Canaan, who made them feel like insects by comparison. The lineage, according to tradition, kept resurfacing generation after generation, requiring repeated confrontation rather than a single final ending. If the seated figure in that inner room understood any of this, his posture makes a grim kind of sense. He was not a body left behind by accident. He was a sentry who sat down at his post and stayed there. Back in the main chamber, the investigation turned toward the center of the room, where 4 heavy chains were driven directly into the bedrock floor, not hanging from any structure, not bolted to any wall, but anchored at 4-point space with obvious precision, one toward each compass direction. Whoever placed them had clearly measured the geometry with intention, not convenience. Metallurgists asked to examine the chains found no forge marks, no weld seams, no evidence of the kind of link-by-link construction every human-made chain in the archaeological record shows. Each length was a single, continuous piece. Estimating the temperature required to produce metal with that structure put the number in a range far beyond anything achievable with ancient or, frankly, most modern forging technology, a range that starts to approach the surface temperature of the sun. And when someone finally touched one of the chains directly, they pulled their hand back immediately. It was warm. Thermal scans confirmed the surrounding rock was cold, undisturbed, exactly as expected for stone that had sat underground for millennia. The heat was coming from inside the metal itself, with no external source anyone could identify. This detail lines up unsettlingly well with older Mesopotamian material, describing divine beings restrained near a great river, held by unbreakable bonds inside a sealed underground space, long before anything resembling the biblical account was written down. Revelation's 9th chapter goes further, describing 4 beings bound specifically at the Euphrates, held until a fixed hour arrives, and the original language used to describe a condition doesn't simply mean imprisoned. It carries a sense of prepared or made ready, language that suggests waiting for deployment rather than waiting to be forgotten. 2 smaller finds near the chamber's entrance added weight to everything inside it. The first was a corroded coin, clean to reveal a crowned, winged figure seated in a posture of authority on one face, and a radiating star-like symbol on the other. Nothing about it matched any documented empire or belief system from a region. What historians could identify was a function of an object like this? In ancient Mesopotamian practice, deliberately burying a token at a specific site was a way of formally dedicating that ground, and whatever lay beneath it, to a particular power. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians makes a sharper point directly. Offerings made to idols in the ancient world were not offerings made to nothing. They were understood within that worldview as reaching something real, The second find, half buried nearby, was a stone figure seated on a throne, hands extended forward as if still waiting to receive something, a horn crown fused to its head, and a name carved at its base that will be familiar to anyone who has read the Old Testament, Baal. The worship associated with that name in the biblical account is among the darkest described in Scripture, including the practice of child sacrifice at sites known as Tophets, where drums were beaten specifically to drown out the sound of what was happening. Jesus later borrowed the name of the valley where that practice took place, Gehenna, as his primary term for final judgment. That word choice was not incidental. Taken together, the coin and the statue suggest something more troubling than an accidental burial site. They suggest a location that generations of people didn't just fear, they worshipped, treating the very thing meant to be contained as a source of power to be appeased rather than a warning to be heeded. The last and most important evidence sat in plain view the entire time, the dust on the chamber floor. Undisturbed for what analysis suggested were centuries, it held four distinct sets of footprints, each showing clean heel strikes, deliberate stride, and full upright balance. Nothing dragged, nothing struggling. Weight estimates placed each print in the range of several 100 pounds, evenly distributed, with a stride length. Every set of prints began at the base of one of the four chains and moved in the same direction, in formation, toward the darker passages at the back of the chamber. None of them turned back toward the entrance. The Dead Sea Scrolls include a text sometimes called the Book of Giants, describing beings of extraordinary size confined by divine judgment, proportions that line up closely with what the footprint analysis produced here. It is worth remembering this is a recovered historical document, not folklore invented for effect. Since the chamber was opened, the region has not been quiet. An earthquake with no clear fault line explanation struck near the Iraq-Turkey border, its rupture running in an unnaturally straight line rather than branching the way seismic activity normally does. Unexplained storm systems, sudden flooding beyond what rainfall could account for, and scattered electrical failures across undamaged infrastructure have all been reported in the same window of time. Local accounts describe animals refusing to settle, and residents in separate, unconnected towns describing an identical, sourceless sense of dread. Whatever is happening, it traces back to one location. The Euphrates opened Eden. It marked the boundary of God's covenant with Abraham. It became the road of exile when Israel turned away from that covenant. And in Revelation, it is named again as the site of a final release. From the first page of Scripture to the last, the same river keeps reappearing at the hinge points of the story. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus was asked plainly what the signs of his return would look like. He spoke of nations in distress, of people paralyzed by fear, of the powers of the heavens being shaken. Language elsewhere used to describe exactly the category of beings Revelation later places at this river. He also gave a warning about timing. Not one sign alone, but all of them arriving together, is what tells you the hour is close. Whatever is buried beneath the Euphrates, and whatever is now, apparently, walked out from beneath it, the honest answer is that no one fully knows yet. But the pattern, the drying river Scripture said would dry, the chains no human forge could have made, warnings left by civilizations that never met each other, and footprints with no return trail, is not easily explained away as coincidence. Jesus asked one question in the Gospel of Luke that he left deliberately unanswered. When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? He didn't answer for his listeners then, and he doesn't answer for us now. He just left it open for whoever happened to be watching when the signs started lining up